people are watching in Africa and around the world. David, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, I guess my first question for you here is, it seems like so much of this they've banned Africa Stream, RT, all of which, and they claim that Africa Stream and is somehow Russian and connected to RT secretly through intelligence links or whatever. But we can get into that. But I think to me, the maybe underlying issue here of what the U.S. government has done in trying to restrict the operations of various Russian media and various independent media like Africa Stream is the assumption that somehow Africans in particular cannot think for themselves, and that the positions and feelings that people have all around the continent on whatever the issue may be, the war in Ukraine or the role of Russia and China in the world or whatever, is only happening because they're being secretly manipulated, which just seems massively paternalistic to me. But I wonder your thoughts on that question, David.
So I have two thoughts on that. The first is, I find that entire concept to be, in addition to being disgustingly racist, I find it incredibly offensive. Personally, I take it very personal because, so I work with African Stream. I know the amount of effort that we put into what we actually put out. I know the amount of fact checking we do. I know the amount of technical accomplishment it takes to actually put out a piece of content, right? Because we have a thing in our newsroom that if you wouldn't want to watch it, then you shouldn't put it out there, right? We put a lot of effort into what we do. And then to hear the US, I believe the number 5, was it number 6 citizen of the US, coming on air to call us by name and basically reduce all of our hard work to Russian. He didn't even say they're funded by Russia or funded by RT. He said they're secretly run by RT, with the inference being that these guys are too stupid to even put out any of this stuff, to create any of this stuff on their own. It can only be the Russians. And there's a very long history of this sort of, it's much more than just paternalistic thinking. There's a very long history of this incredibly boneheaded sort of thinking in the US. I personally trace it back as far back as the 19th century, where this fictitious ailment called drapetomania was invented, with the claim that any African wanting to be free was suffering from a mental illness, because as we well know, Africans have no human desire to be free. The natural position of an African is supposedly slavery. This happened again in 1930. This was at the peak of the Jim Crow era, at a time where Africans, both in the diaspora and on the continent, where I believe in the US, the term was 3/5 of the human being. In Africa, we weren't even classified as humans. In some parts of the continent, like in Southern Africa, Africans were classified as flora and fauna. And in a place like Nigeria, where I come from, Nigeria wasn't even classified as a country under occupation. It was classified as a corporate object owned by the Queen. We're ruled by something called the Royal Niger Trading Company. And in the midst of all that, Africans on both sides of the Atlantic started uniting to come up with some sort of Pan-Africanist thinking, and the US government said it's the Soviets that are behind it. In the 1960s, during the African independence era, which coincided with the civil rights movement, because they were both joined at the hip, it was the same thing. Martin Luther King is a Russian agent, Kwame Nkrumah is a Russian agent, Patrice Lumumba, Fred Hampton, you guys are all Russian agents. In 1985, the apartheid head of Prime Minister of South Africa claimed that blacks are happy in South Africa under apartheid, and the only blacks who aren't happy are those who have had Russian ideas pushed into their heads. So it's like we're in 2024, and this same thing is being rinsed again, that without the involvement of this Russian subversive funding or indoctrination, whatever, these group of people, black people, are just too fundamentally stupid to have any positions, any ideologies, any voices, any thoughts of their own. They can only do something when there's the hand of Vladimir puppeting them.
It's really incredible. It's so paternalistic and, like you said, racist.